Welcome to Books and Bridges, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We continue our discussion series on treasures of world literature. Tonight, we examine the Tale of Genji, what some people call the world's first novel or the world's first psychological novel. Books and Bridges is a public humanities institute of ideas and conversation. We examine the wisdoms of the world and apply them to modern life. Let me also thank Utah Humanities for funding this event and making it possible. I'm your host, Nathan Nielsen, and our guest is Krishnan Venkatesh. Mr. Venkatesh has taught at St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico for more than 30 years and helped shape its Eastern Classics program, graduate program. From 2003 to 2008, he was the Dean of Graduate Studies at the college and is the author of a book on the Pali Canon of the Buddha and a forthcoming book on Tolkien. Born in Malaysia in 1960 to a South Indian Brahmin father and a Hakka Chinese mother, Venkatesh studied English literature at Magdalen College in Cambridge. He researched Shakespeare at the University of Munster, Germany. And from 1986 to 1989, he taught literature and philosophy at Shanxi University, China. The lifelong companions on his bedside table include Montaigne, Chaucer, Wordsworth, Zhuangzi, Dogen, Chekhov, Tolstoy, Balzac, and Shakespeare. So, Mr. Venkatesh, let's begin our discussion tonight. Just tell us what kind of book The Tale of Genji is. What is this monstrous 1,000-page Japanese classic?
Okay, so monstrous, more than 1,000 page. I think this is, I think one book is 1,400 pages. So truly monstrous. By the way, I say thank you for having me again, Nathan. This is a real pleasure to be here, and a little bit of an adventure for me to share this this book that is one of my favorite books, but is would be a controversial book today, as we'll see as the evening progresses. So this book, The Tale of Genji, was written around 1000 AD, right? So wrap your mind around that. 1000 AD in the Heian court of Kyoto, which in the Heian culture is a culture that went from around 800 to 1200 AD. And so, so 400 years old, so it lived longer than the US has been around, at least, so it's been around a while. And so this is a book written in the Heian court in Japanese, and around 1000 AD. It's like 400 years before Dante, right? And so, the West was in the Dark Ages. But the Heian court is what many people think of. I mean, the two things that people think of when they think about historical Japan. One is, samurai movies set in the 17th century with Toshiro Mifune, kind of like manly, grizzled samurais. And the other is this extremely refined, courtly environment where everyone dressed gorgeously and the manners were refined and people spoke poetry to each other. That was the Heian court, so that origin of kind of high culture Japan is Heian. And it's the only thing that we have in the West to compare with it is probably the court of Louis XIV in France. So that degree of sophistication and subtlety in human relationships. And so this court, so everyone is sort of immaculately dressed, and we have pictures from there, but we also have diaries from various women, including the other famous book from this period is The Pillow Book by Sei Shonagon, right? And that book kind of is like a journal where very minute accounts are given of daily life in the court and particular interactions. And there you'll see that there are relations between men and women, for example, of a very refined nature, where they communicate with enigmatic poems, right? And so And so a lot of being successful in this court meant being able to navigate the kind of delicate social mores, being able to navigate intricate rules involving kind of rank and relationship, but also involving real mastery of words, where you don't say too much, you don't say too little, and you say something a little bit obliquely. So it was a court where, to be successful, you had to be really good at interpreting people, reading between the lines, and sending out messages that would need to be interpreted accordingly. So that was the Heian court, kind of refined, dangerous in a way. In that if you say the wrong thing, or if you say the right thing not very well, it could be the end of your career, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you'd be out. So in this court, the author of this book, Murasaki Shikibu, was a lady in waiting, and so was Sei Shonagon, who wrote the Pillow Book. So they were apparently rivals to each other, but their books are almost opposite to each other. Now, before I go into the book itself and the content of the book, I have to say that one of the things that comes across about Heian culture is that relationships between men and women, how do I put this, observe tremendous social distancing, right? In that a man would almost never see a woman's body, right? So because women were secluded behind screens, just like we're behind a screen now, looking down through the screen, but we're thinking of like these Japanese silk screens. And so the women were secluded, and it was a real rarity to be able to see a woman's face. The interchanges took place through a screen, or by means of poems or letters or voice. And often the crucial breakthrough point was when a man would step through the screen. Not through the screen, open the screen and step into the room. That's when the that would be the conclusion to the foreplay, as it were. But at that point, that's usually when the story, the narrative stops. The man enters the screen. Either he's invited, or he pushes his way through, or he senses the time is right and he goes through. So this screen is really important. Maybe almost every interaction in Genji takes place through a screen. So if I were to stage this, for example, if I were to do an opera, The Tale of Genji, maybe the main prop would be a screen.
Right? Does the screen operate as a sort of mask, do you think?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. I mean, what the screen does is very complex in a way. Like it takes all the erotics away from the body. And so everything is in words. It's in the verbal interaction, in the imagination, and and of course there's sex. There's lots of sex in it, but it's never mentioned. Right, in the Tale of Genji, it's never mentioned. So I hear that a recent translation would say something like, and then they had sex, which it seems like totally wrong. So some would say it's not fundamentally about the sex, but there's sex.
Question: Could this novel have been written by a man? Or
okay, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Keep that one on hold. It's an important.
It's significant that it's written by a woman.
Yeah,
and that. Really only at the flowering of this cultural period, maybe could this kind of novel been written.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the men wrote in classical Chinese as the educated language, and women were excluded from classical Chinese. So it's the women who wrote in Japanese. So I would say that at this period it would be extremely unlikely that a man would have written this. But you're asking something deeper, like could a novel like this? Could a novel like this have been written by a man? I would say no, but I'll say why later.
The erotic valence different because it's written by a woman.
It could be. Yeah. Certain aspects. So in a way, the kind of world that is portrayed in this novel that we might consider somewhat dystopian. Right, so I imagine like taking the Tale of Genji like this, and if I were to change nothing but then just republish it as a dystopian novel set in some future utopia. This, you know, would be quite plausible. This is a very strange world, and a world that I think most modern people would immediately think is very alien to anything that you're used to. There's this whole sense of again, social distance, you know, is different from what we're used to. The aesthetics is also somewhat different. You know, for example, the Heians would blacken their teeth. You know, so because it was considered white teeth was animalistic, and so they would lacquer their teeth black with black lacquer. Also, black was considered a beautiful color, so everyone in this court would have black teeth. You know, so when they smiled, you just see black, which in modern America we'd consider horrifying, right? But but it appeared to be
white makeup on their face
and white makeup. You know, so probably I'm not sure if that. I think that was there. I really don't know, but probably it was there. There's one moment in the book when the young emperor, little boy, is described as having teeth that are darkened from decay, which gave him a very winsome smile. Right, you know, so it was admired, you know, so there are certain things in this aesthetic that bring you up short. However, once you get into the book, you slowly find that the kind of personal world, the emotional world is not alien, right? It's okay. Let's see. So are we ready to get into the book? Well,
let's do it.
Okay, so I mean, the short Tale of Genji, it's called the Tale of Genji, right? So it's a 1,000 or more page novel, seemingly about this guy called Genji. Actually, only about 2/3 of it is about Genji. So Genji is an aristocrat, a son of the emperor who has been sidelined from the succession. So he's got a job in government. You don't hear about what he does, but he's got some kind of role to play. And he is best known for being kind of Casanova figure, right? So, or otherwise, AKA sexual predator, right? You know, so this is a man, you might say the tale of Genji is a tale of his erotic exploits. You know, this is about all the relationships that he had. Actually, not even all the relationships that he had, about 20 of them, right, out of many. So on the surface, it's about this guy who had a lot of women. He was tremendously beautiful, very attractive, but also extremely refined. He was, you know, so in the book, he comes off as a fine poet, a fine painter, somebody who did things right, who had the right touch with everything, because the women found him attractive, and he had a kind of magnetism, you know. So one epithet for him was shining. So the shining prince, right? So this Genji, well, he was a shining prince. Whenever he goes into the room, all eyes are on him. Everything lights up, right? And then he also has he's also a gentleman in many ways. You know, he's a kind man. He's courteous. He takes care of his women. He's not consciously cruel to them. He's respected, right? He's an intelligent person. So this is a complex figure. Nowadays we might just, you know, put a label on him saying bad man, right? Mm-hmm. So but I think the attitude to him in the book is very complex. Okay, so about 2/3 of it is about Genji, but then the remaining part of the book is about, in a way, his son and the person who is taken as his son. So really, but it's in the next generation. So it's about like 2 generations of sons after Genji. So it's a 3-generation book, and in a way, it's about the effect that his shadow has on these young men. You know, so the first 2/3 of the book set up a kind of long shadow that reaches into the lives of these 2 young men and all the women they encounter. And as the book begins with a kind of mythic presentation as Genji. He becomes he's kind of larger than life mythic figure, and maybe that's how everyone saw him. But then as the book progresses and as he fades out of the picture, we get a different novel in the last 400 pages, one of minute psychological intricacy, right? Almost realistic, almost something like between Virginia Woolf and Henry James. Sometimes, where you have the psychological nuance, but also the careful attention to shifts in consciousness, right? So the last 400 pages of the book are just a marvel. And it's amazing that there were no antecedents to this novel. Apparently, so it's not as if the Tale of Genji grew out of a few hundred years of learning how to do prose narratives. Right? It just pops up, this finished masterwork that achieves, the achievement of this book, I think is comparable to say Henry James. Right, in terms of sheer sophistication and complexity, by the time you reach the end, but the novel grows from first page to the last, like that.
When we hear that this is a psychological novel, in our maybe our modern conceits, we tend to be surprised by it. This notion that psychology didn't really come along until the modern era or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, human psychology has always been around, but it's the idea of capturing it in writing. Is capturing psychological nuance, it must not be just a modern thing.
Yeah, well,
there are some people who think that, though.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we became aware of it, but if being psychological means aware of being unaware, kind of aware of being aware of things we're not conscious of, that every human being seems to operate on 2 or 3 motivations at once, right? And to be aware of only one of them, if that, or that I think the Greeks were aware of already, that this is how people work. We're very confused, and we don't know ourselves very well. I think once we say that we don't know ourselves very well, that's really the entry to psychology, right? And so one might say that Genji is psychological in that sense, and the narrator is, I think, very aware of how his characters know or don't know themselves and each other, right? The other side of this, the psychological, when we say psychological novel, is that one of the things that involves is the study of how people read each other. Right? So we read people, and we read them reading us. And we read them reading us reading them.
And right? we read people misreading
each other. Yeah, right. And we misread people misreading each other, right? And so
all kinds of reading going on.
Yeah. So a lot of, so that could, a lot of human interaction goes on in what I would call the reciprocal imagination. Like when you're in love with somebody and you're focused on something with real intensity, that what you imagine, they imagine, you're imagining, can cause you to do something.
Yeah.
Much more so than what they do or say. Right? It's what you imagine, they imagine, you imagining, can actually cause you to do something reckless, or to escape, or to be ashamed. So the psychological novel, I think, operates at that level. Right? Mutual reading. So this book is intricate. It's a psychological novel. I think it's also a novel that asks profound moral questions. And I'll come back to that. Sure. During the course of the book, several people in the court voiced disapproval of Genji, and in one of the translations, his behavior is described as appalling. At one point, so I think that it's hard to read him as being universally idolized in that world, and when you read the book, you become aware that the author is, one of the things the author is presenting is a picture of the amount of suffering he caused, the destruction that he caused. And I think she's fairly clear-sighted about this. Now imagine this is a woman writing about the man. And we're going to get into a few passages shortly. But one of the questions that comes up in this is what is the relation of the moral response to other kinds of response, right? So for example, the aesthetic response, which is a very key response in the Heian culture. So you have this real valuation of aesthetic refinement, aesthetic beauty, and Genji has that, right? And one can adore him for those gifts that he has. On the other hand, he's very destructive. Now, this is not a good person. How do you square those two? And in our age and society, the moral judgment trumps everything else, right? So that reigns supreme. But should it? So what happens if the moral response is not the only one, and if it competes against some other response like the aesthetic response, then you got a problem. And I think in a way, Lady Murasaki is very aware of that problem, and this leads to in readers, especially, a very conflicted response to Genji. I think if one comes away from the book only admiring him, or if one comes away only condemning him, then you kind of like miss the nuance of the whole book. The response to the book has to contain both. I've heard it said that the special thing about Lady Murasaki that she shares with towering figures like Dostoevsky is that she doesn't feel the need to approve of what she loves or to hate what she disapproves of. Right, and that shows a very strong intelligence, a kind of like an ability to stand outside herself. Yeah. So one of the things I want to do this evening is to share some passages from the book with you, so that you can see what kind of a book this is, and you can get a kind of close-up flavor of how this book works. Is that okay?
Let me ask, do you mind if the participants ask questions during the progress of the reading, or do you want them to wait till the end?
I would suggest wait till the end, because if I if we ask questions in the middle, I'd probably never get to the end. So there's a place that I want to get to with the quotations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we'll save it. Yeah. So I'm going to start pulling out some quotations here. So this is I'm using the translation by Seidensticker. And this comes early in the book. So Genji, hang on a second, I shot ahead here. Okay. So Genji was born to the emperor and sidelined from the succession. As I said, his mother died when he was very young and he never knew her. And his father, the emperor, then among his many wives, took a new wife whose name was Fujitsubo. And so the first passage this is on just the second page of the novel. This is where things start, really. Since Genji never left his father's side, it was not easy for this new lady, the recipient of so many visits, to hide herself from him. The other ladies were disinclined to think themselves her inferior, and indeed each of them had her own merits. They were all rather past their prime, however. Fujitsubo's beauty was of a younger and fresher sort. Now I just want to pause here just to point out that her Murasaki's gift of understatement here, she lets you read between the lines. So the recipient of so many visits suggests that this lady was a real favorite of the emperor, that he would choose her for his sexual encounters rather than the other wives. And you can imagine what effect this had on them, which is given in the next sentence. The other ladies were disinclined to think themselves her inferior. And indeed, each of them had her own merits. You can now sense a kind of the defensive voice of the other ladies who feel themselves insulted by Fujitsubo's primacy here. But then they were all rather past their prime, however. Fujitsubo's beauty was of a younger and fresher sort. Now, that gives you a clue. They must have hated her, and she must have found herself in a way in a nest of vipers. You know, so this is kind of dangerous situation for this new wife to come in and supplant the other wives, especially if she was obviously more beautiful than they were. Right. So, though in her childlike shyness, she made an especial effort not to be seen, Genji occasionally caught a glimpse of her face. Okay, so he's a young boy now, so he's never leaving his father's side, right? He could not remember his own mother, and it moved him deeply to learn from the lady who had first told the emperor of Fujitsubo that the resemblance was striking. He wanted to be near her always. Okay, then do not be unfriendly, said the emperor to Fujitsubo. So that suggests that Fujitsubo, that the emperor needed to tell her this, suggests that she's a little bit kind of annoyed or troubled by the young Genji's clinging to her. So sometimes it almost seems to me too that you are his mother. Do not think him forward, be kind to him. Your eyes, your expression, you are really so uncommonly like her that you could pass for his mother. Right? So even the emperor sees the similarity. Okay, now so this woman, Fujitsubo, becomes the first great love of Genji's life, and maybe the greatest love of Genji's life. And we're going to follow their relationship in the next 20 minutes. But it's with a heart-eating passion that Genji loves her. Now, what's fascinating to me about this beginning, right from the second page, is the way Lady Murasaki paints a portrait of love as substitution. So erotic love is all about substitution of a kind. You know, so there's a hole that Genji has that needs to be filled. That's his mother, and he doesn't remember the mother, but it's because somebody tells him that Fujitsubo looks like the mother that this sparks something in him, and he needs to be near her always. And so the emperor knows that Fujitsubo is like Genji's mother. So for him, there's some kind of substitution going on. But Genji has never met the mother. So now this is Fujitsubo now substitutes for someone he's never known, someone who only exists in the imagination. So this theme of substitution in Eros becomes, in a way, the main theme of the whole book. So if one were to look in the whole book, and it gets very sophisticated at the end, then I would say, well, look at the question of what Eros is. What is erotic attachment, right? And so this book paints it well. Substitution, that's the key. You're substituting something for something else. Okay, so this passion starts here, and so Genji grows up, and as he grows up, he has a number of relationships with different women, while also being still passionately yearning for Fujitsubo, whom he can't have because she's, you know, the stepmother and also the emperor's wife. But in his quest for women, and he always tends to go for the women who've been rejected, who are kind of forlorn, alone, outliers, peripheral, that he's very interested in them. But some of his men go out in a way looking for women for him. And one of them finds this 10-year-old girl who's an orphan. And they say, you've got to see this girl. You've got to see this girl. So he goes and he eavesdrops, and he looks, he eavesdrops on this girl's exchange with her grandmother, who's her guardian. She's the nun in the passage that I'm reading, and Genji is struck by something. So this 10-year-old girl, right? So, and he's looking at the face, and he says how he would like to see her in a few years, and a sudden realization brought him close to tears. The resemblance to Fujitsubo, for whom he yearned, was astonishing. The nun stroked the girl's hair. You will not comb it, and still it's so pretty. I worry about you. You do seem so very young. Others are much more grown up at your age. Your poor dead mother. She was only 10 when her father died, and she understood everything. What will become of you when I am gone? She was weeping, and a vague sadness had come over Genji too. The girl gazed attentively at her, and then looked down. The hair that fell over her forehead was thick and lustrous. So this girl is Murasaki. Her name is Murasaki, so the same name as the author of the novel. And this is the first meeting of Genji with her. And there's several things that come up in this short passage. I find the passage very moving. And it said, I'm thinking, that he is brought close to tears, so something touches him deeply. And we might ask about what this vague sadness is that comes over Genji. Is it pity? Is it sadness about human life, about the vulnerable? So this is not a man who is only fixated in predation, right? But he's moved by things. But then there's this twist, especially that when the hair that fell over her forehead was thick and lustrous. There's this kind of erotic twist that comes over at the end here, where that this draws Genji's attention. Wow, this hair is amazing. This is just amazing, and he's struck by this, and he then thinks at the end of the exchange, his assistant hurried away, and Genji too withdrew. What a discovery! It was for such unforeseen rewards that his amorous followers were so constantly on the prowl. Such a rare outing for him, and it had brought such a find. She was a perfectly beautiful child. Who might she be? He was beginning to make plans. The child must stand in the place of one whom she so resembled, Right? So now you get the substitution theme again becomes very prominent. So Genji's thought here, and this is appalling when it comes out, is that he has to have her, and in fact he grooms her. So the next part of the novel. So we're early on in the novel. The next part of the novel has chapters of him grooming her to be his future wife. He's or his sexual partner, and the child doesn't know this. So it's about 6 years before anything happens. But I think at this stage he's already planning it. He adopts her. He negotiates, takes her into his home, makes another home for her, and raises her there, trains her, teaches her just how to be. He's the father figure for her, and she's very confused when she realizes what his real intentions are. So this at this point you have something that would strike most moderns as extremely sinister. So this is Murasaki. Okay, so this one. So we have two threads going on here. We've got the Fujitsubo thread. We've got the Murasaki thread happening. Now both are happening simultaneously in Genji's life, and in fact, at any given point, he's got 3 or 4 women going on. But the two constant threads in this, actually 2 of the 3 constant threads. So 2 threads are Fujitsubo and Murasaki. So he's intensely interested in both of them. But of course, Fujitsubo is the one who has primacy because she's the main substitute, and Murasaki becomes the substitute for the substitute. Right, so then we go on. Okay, so now we're going to switch a little bit to his relationship with Fujitsubo, and we're beginning to see how, well, you are beginning to see how edgy this book is. It's very dark and very edgy. So in spite of this beautiful, glowing, golden cover of many of the editions, this is a very dark book. Right, so there's one point when Fujitsubo is ill, and sorry, I have to pull back. Okay, so a couple of years later, Fujitsubo was ill and had gone home to her family. Genji managed a sympathetic thought or two for his lonely father, the emperor, but his thoughts were chiefly on the possibility of seeing Fujitsubo. He quite halted his visits to other ladies. All through the day, at home and at court. He sat gazing off into space, and in the evening he would press Omiobu, her handmaiden, to be his intermediary. How she did it, I do not know, but she contrived a meeting. So he's been trying and trying and trying, right? But now he manages to contrive a meeting. It is sad to have to say that his earlier attentions, so unwelcome, no longer seemed real. And the mere thought that they had been successful was for Fujitsubo a torment. Determined that there would not be another meeting, she was shocked to find him in her presence again. She did not seek to hide her distress, and her efforts to turn him away delighted him, even as they put him to shame. Just going to pause here a little bit. That's so powerful, right? She did not seek to hide her distress, and her efforts to turn him away delighted him, even as they put him to shame. So you start to see the psychological complexity of this. That they put him to shame shows that he's not completely oblivious to her suffering, her torment here, and she's clearly tormented. She doesn't want to see him. So he's conflicted. There was no one else quite like her. In that fact was his undoing. He would be less a prey to longing if he could find in her even a trace of the ordinary. Now, I think, just to show the sophistication of this novel, I think what we're seeing in these two sentences is free indirect speech, that we're in Genji's mind. And this is his attempt to justify his pursuit of her. There was no one else quite like her. In that fact was his undoing. He would be less a prey to longing if he could find in her even a trace of the ordinary. Oh, I have to do it. I have to see her. Right? And the tumult of thoughts and feelings that now assailed him, he would have liked to consign it to the mountain of obscurity. It might have been better, he sighed, so short was the night, if he had not come at all. So few and scattered the nights, so few the dreams. Would that the dream tonight might take me with it. He was in tears, and she did, after all, have to feel sorry for him. Were I to disappear in the last of dreams, would yet my name live on in infamy? So he is in tears, but there's a kind of ambiguity. He's also trying to make her feel sorry for him, which she does. So there's a hint of manipulation here. Okay, so she had every right to be unhappy, and he was sad for her. He was sad for her, right? Omiobu gathered his clothes and brought them out to him. Back at Nijo, his house, he spent a tearful day in bed. He had word from Omiobu that her lady had not read his letter. So it always was, and yet he was hurt. He remained in distraught seclusion for several days. Okay, so reading between the lines here, she's distressed, she's angry, so she will not read his letters. This is contrary to the erotic ethos of this court. So the thought that his father might be wondering about his absence filled him with terror. So he's afraid. Okay, then lamenting the burden of sin that seemed to be hers. Okay, I'm thinking, what does that mean? Okay, Fujitsubo was more and more unwell and could not bestir herself, despite repeated messages summoning her back to court. She was not at all her usual self, and what was to become of her? She took to her bed as the weather turned warmer. 3 months had now passed, and her condition was clear. And the burden of sin now seemed to have made it necessary that she submit to curious and reproving stares. Okay, so she's pregnant, and she's pregnant by Genji. Now, so this is the hint. This is what happened apparently in the previous page. So something happened. Lady Murasaki hints at this. We're not told directly, but clearly now she's pregnant with Genji's child. Okay, and I'm looking back at the first line of this paragraph, lamenting the burden of sin that seemed to be hers. That seemed to be hers, right? So she's feeling guilty, but she's clear-sighted enough to know that maybe it's not her fault. So she too is conflicted. Okay, so then, and she's also afraid of the social shame. Her women thought her behavior very curious indeed. Why had she let so much time pass without informing the emperor? Because everyone thinks that it's the emperor's child. There was, of course, a crucial matter of which she spoke to no one. Ben, the daughter of her old nurse, and Omiobu, both of whom were very close to her and attended her in the bath, had ample opportunity to observe her condition. Omiobu was aghast. Her lady had been trapped by the harshest of fates. The emperor would seem to have been informed that a malign spirit had possession of her and to have believed the story, as did the court in general. He sent a constant stream of messengers. I can't read the next line, which terrified her and allowed no pause in her sufferings. Genji had a strange, rather awful dream. He consulted a soothsayer who said that it portended events so extraordinary as to be almost unthinkable. It contains bad omens as well. You must be careful. It was not my own dream, but a friend's. We will see whether it comes true, and in the meantime, you must keep it to yourself. What could it mean? He heard of Fujitsubo's condition, thought of their night together, and wondered whether the two might be related. That is Murasaki's understatement here. He exhausted his stock of pleas for another meeting. So you know that wondered whether the two might be related means that he probably lay awake nights thinking about this, just mortified and frightened. Horrified that matters were so out of hand, Omiobu could do nothing for him. He had on rare occasions had a brief note, no more than a line or two, but now even these messages ceased coming. So, big problem. This child who is to be born turns out to be the next emperor, and the current emperor assumes that it's his son. He doesn't occur to him to think that it's Genji's, and Fujitsubo and Genji, of course, have got to hide this intensely. But Genji is at court and well aware that that's his son, and no one else is. You know, so this is the moment where you have this son that is born out of, I think, a very terrifying encounter for Fujitsubo. Okay, I'm going to read on just a few more passages, then we'll sit and we'll think about the implications of all this. All this time, so Genji's got Fujitsubo, he's got Murasaki, but he's also married all this time, right? He's also married to a woman called Aoi. Okay, so Fujitsubo had gone home to her family, looking restlessly, as always, for a chance to see her. So he's relentless. Genji was much criticized by his father-in-law's people at Sanjo. That's the father-in-law of his wife, his real wife. And rumors of the young Murasaki were out. So now everyone's found out that he's got this girl at this other house. Certain of the women at Sanjo let it be known that a new lady had been taken in at Nijo. Genji's wife was intensely displeased. It was most natural that she should be, for she did not, of course, know that the lady was a mere child. If she had complained to him openly, as most women would have done, he might have told her everything and no doubt eased her jealousy. It was her arbitrary judgments that sent him wandering. Oh, so it's her fault. Okay, she had no specific faults, no vices or blemishes which he could point to. She had been the first lady in his life, and in an abstract way, he admired and treasured her. Okay, in an abstract way, he admired and treasured her. In other words, he really didn't like her. Her feelings would change, he felt sure, once she was more familiar with his own. She was a perceptive woman, and the change was certain to come. So if she only understood me, she would know that I'm okay. So she still occupied first place among his ladies. Okay, so Genji's thinking about Aoi, his wife, whom he doesn't really like, but he respects. On the one hand, he's also thinking about Fujitsubo the whole time and relentless in his quest for Fujitsubo. But he's also thinking about Murasaki. So Murasaki was by now thoroughly comfortable with him. So he's been grooming her. She was maturing in appearance and manner, and yet there was artlessness in her way of clinging to him. Thinking it too early to let the people in the main hall know who she was, he kept her in one of the outer wings, which he had fitted to perfection. He was constantly with her, tutoring her in the polite accomplishments and especially calligraphy. It was as if he had brought home a daughter who had spent her early years in another house. He had studied the qualifications of her stewards and assured himself that she would have everything she needed. Everyone in the house, save only Koremitsu, was consumed with curiosity. Her father still did not know of her whereabouts. So she does have a father who's a prince at the court, but Genji has hidden her from him. Sometimes she would weep for her grandmother. Her mind was full of other things when Genji was with her, and often he stayed the night. But he had numerous other places to look in upon, and he was quite charmed by the wistfulness with which she would see him off in the evening. Sometimes he would spend 2 and 3 days at the palace and go from there to Sanjo. Finding a pensive Murasaki upon his return, he would feel as if he had taken in a little orphan. He no longer looked forward to his nocturnal wanderings with the same eagerness. Her granduncle, the bishop, kept himself informed of her affairs and was pleased and puzzled. Genji sent most lavish offerings for memorial services. So this guy, our Genji, has many things going on in his mind at any given moment. But 3 women that dominate his thoughts. Okay, so now I'm going to give, I think, the last encounter with Fujitsubo, the last full encounter. So a few months later, he manages in his relentless pursuit to gain access to Fujitsubo. Okay, and here's in a way the climax of their relationship. She was appalled then when one day he found a way to approach her. He had made his plans carefully, and no one in her household was aware of them. The result was for her an unrelieved nightmare. Right, so this is the most terrible thing that could happen to her. She's been trying to avoid him, and he's finally got an extremely clever strategy to get in. The words with which he sought to comfort her, so suddenly he's there, right? And the words with which he sought to comfort her were so subtle and clever that I am unable to transcribe them. But she was unmoved. After a time, she was seized with sharp chest pains. Omyobu and Ben hurried to her side. Genji was reeling from the grim determination with which she had repulsed him. Everything, past and future, seemed to fall away into darkness. Scarcely aware of what he was doing, he stayed on in her apartments even though day was breaking. Now it's a no-no to stay on after dawn. You have to go home at dawn. But he's there in daytime. You know, what if the emperor comes in? What if other people find him there? So he stayed on in her apartments even though day was breaking. Several other women, alerted to the crisis, were now up and about. This is a real crisis. Omyobu and Ben bundled a half-conscious Genji into a closet. They were beside themselves as they pushed his clothes in after him. Fujitsubo was now taken with fainting spells. Prince Hyobu and her chamberlain were sent for. A dazed Genji listened to the excitement from his closet. Towards evening, Fujitsubo began to feel rather more herself again. She had not the smallest suspicion that Genji was still in the house, her women having thought it best to keep the information from her. She came out to her sitting room. Much relieved, Prince Hyobu departed. The room was almost empty. There were not many women whom she liked to have in her immediate presence, and the others kept out of sight. Omyobu and Ben were wondering how they might contrive to spirit Genji away. He must not be allowed to bring on another attack. So her women are aware this is very dangerous, that she's almost on the verge of total collapse from Genji's intrusion, right? So the closet door being open a few inches, he slipped out and made his way between a screen and the wall. He looked with wonder at the lady, and tears came to his eyes. Still in some pain, she was gazing out at the garden. Might it be the end? She was asking herself. Her profile was lovely beyond description. The women sought to tempt her with sweets, which were indeed most temptingly laid out on the lid of a decorative box. But she did not look at them. To Genji, she was a complete delight as she sat in silence, lost in deeply troubled meditations. I'm thinking, is he insane here? That he could be thinking like this after what he's just witnessed that she's gone through. Like, to Genji, she was a complete delight as she sat in silence, lost in deeply troubled meditations. So he's looking at her and not at all gauging what must be going on in her mind. And she is lost in meditations, unaware that he's watching on. This is kind of an amazing moment. Her hair, as it cascaded over her shoulders, The lines of her head and face, the glow of her skin, were to Genji irresistibly beautiful. They were very much like each other, she and Murasaki. Right? So that Murasaki and Fujitsubo always conjoined in his mind, the two substitutes. Memories had dimmed over the years, but now the astonishing resemblance did a little to dispel his gloom. The dignity that quite put one to shame also reminded him of Murasaki. He could hardly think of them as two persons. And yet, perhaps because Fujitsubo had been so much in his thoughts over the years, there did, after all, seem to be a difference. Fujitsubo's was a calmer and more mature dignity. No longer in control of himself, he slipped inside her curtains and pulled at her sleeve. So distinctive was the fragrance that she recognized him immediately. You can always tell when Genji's in the room because of the fragrance. Right? In sheer terror, she sank to the floor. If she would only look at him. She pulled her towards him. She turned to flee, but her hair became entangled in her cloak as she tried to slip out of it. It seemed to be her fate that everything should go against her. Now, this is the kind of like intrusion through the curtains that we find in like Dracula movies sometimes, where she, fell to the floor in terror and try to flee this figure. So he's something like a vampire. So deliriously, Genji poured forth all the resentment he had kept to himself, but it only revolted her. I am not feeling well. Perhaps on another occasion, I will be better able to receive you. So this is her kind of polite formula for repulsing him. Yet he talked on. Mixed in with the flow were details which did, after all, seem to move her. This was not, of course, their first meeting, but she had been determined that there would not be another. Though avoiding explicit rejoinder, she held him off until morning. Held him off from what? Right? He could not force himself upon her. In her quiet dignity, she left him feeling very much ashamed of himself. If I may see you from time to time and so drive away a little of the gloom, I promise you that I shall do nothing to offend you. The most ordinary things have a way of moving people who are as they were to each other, and this was no ordinary meeting. It was daylight. Omyobu and Ben were insistent, and Fujitsubo seemed barely conscious. I think I must die, he said in a final burst of passion. I cannot bear the thought of having you know that I still exist. And if I die, my love for you will be an obstacle on my way to salvation. If other days must be as this has been, I still shall be weeping 2 and 3 lives hence. I'll wait for the next passage. It seems to have trouble loading. We can't stop here. Oh, there it is. And the sin will be yours as well, he says. You're to blame too. Right? She sighed. Remember that the cause is in yourself of a sin which you say I must bear through lives to come. So this is a kind of very firm denial of her own guilt. She managed an appearance of resignation which tore at his heart. It was no good trying her patience further. Half distraught, he departed. He would only invite another defeat if he tried to see her again. She must be made to feel sorry for him. He would not even write to her. He remained shut up at Nijo, seeing neither the emperor nor the crown prince, his gloom spreading discomfort through the house and making it almost seem that he had lost the will to live. Right? So making it almost seem that he had lost the will to live. I am in this world, but to see my woes increase. He must leave it behind. But there was the dear girl who so needed him. He could not abandon her. So he's I'm gonna pause it here. So he's making excuses for himself. He makes the grand gesture of wanting to die because he can't attain the object of his love, but then he uses the other woman as an excuse. I'm going to pause it here. So this is rather kind of amazing relationship, right? So what I've given you is basically the tip of the iceberg of Genji. So the last quotation is just before 200, page 200. There's about at least 800 more pages to come, and it gets better and better. But this is the last great encounter with Fujitsubo. I forgot to say that when he is closeted with her at daytime, here, this is probably the first time he's seen her face since he was a little boy. Right? So it's a very, very intense moment for him. But you see here, in a way, like all the, I wouldn't say it's moral ambiguity, because I think there's no ambiguity that he's coming across as absolutely terrible in these interactions. However, there is a sense that his feelings are real. You know, so when he's weeping and prostrate, you know, who knows what he's feeling? I think there's real yearning there. But there's also shame. There's also terror. There's also, I guess, mortification, despair at being rejected by his mother, right? You know, so I'm going to pause it here. I've spoken long enough. I'm going to kind of let you ask some questions.
Well, we do have one question from a participant. Let me pull this up. So Amy Wilder asks, you've pointed out some of the subtlety and nuance at work in this text. Given that, would you point readers toward a certain translator? And if so, what in particular would make it a superior choice?
Okay, so this is obviously a very, very hard book to translate. But there are two that I like. So here's Seidensticker and here's Tyler. Right? Tyler is kind of even bigger than Seidensticker. Tyler is the more recent one. And Tyler is more literal. Right? And by that I mean, for example, in Heian literature, you don't refer to, the author doesn't refer to people by names, but by titles. Right? So Seidensticker is making a concession to Western readers by narrating his characters with their names, Genji, Fujitsubo, Murasaki, right? And so that wouldn't be in the original text. Tyler refers to them by their titles, which can be awfully confusing. Say when a male character changes his rank several times, or when a female character changes her marital position, right? You know, so then you wonder, who is this? Who's the first empress now? Who's the third empress now? Who's the middle chancellor, second rank now, right? You know, so the Tyler maintains a kind of faithfulness to the text that gives a distance. He's also better at in a way rendering Lady Murasaki's understatement, kind of like a polite understatement that conceals an earthquake, right? So Tyler kind of renders that. Seidensticker, I find he's more emotionally shrewd, and he manages to get the switches in passion. Those passages that I read were all Seidensticker. You know, so it comes. It's very powerful. So were I to recommend translation, I say the first translation should be Seidensticker. Right, but if you really get into it, read the Tyler as well, because sometimes in these crucial passages, Tyler has a slightly different take on what's happening. Occasionally in Japanese, the pronouns might be ambiguous, so the translators might disagree as to who's doing what at any given point. Right, but the other thing about Seidensticker is that he's extremely skillful at doing free indirect speech. You know, it's an art to do free indirect speech well in writing. So with Seidensticker, you find that he's moving back and forth very easily between the narrator and the internal thoughts of the characters. So I'd say Seidensticker first, and then Tyler.
Well, I have a question. It's hard to articulate, but there seems to be a sense of slippery reality in which the characters seem to be kind of adding layer upon layer upon layer of some kind of emotional experience that is removed from what's actually happening kind of on the ground, so to speak. But yet it seems like the further they move away from what's happening kind of on the ground in a visceral level, it seems like that is still having an effect upon their bodily experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how to explain that, but this is what strikes me. It's like at several stages of remove from what's actually happening, it's like reality is proliferating with it.
Yeah.
It's like we create through our imaginings our own realities that become no less real. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, that's well expressed. I mean, I'm thinking, just think of all those times that you went out of your mind, that you lost touch with reality. Right? I'm thinking especially in romantic relationships that could happen. But sometimes we can lose touch of reality, you know, in phases of anger, like when we're enraged with a certain person. But also like the dreamlike nature of romantic reality, when you're obsessed with a certain person and you're obsessed with what they might be thinking about you. And it's only afterwards, sometimes years afterward, when you realize what a madman you were. You had no idea what was in front of you. Like that person that you were addressing was thinking nothing like what you thought they were thinking, right? And so what happens then? You know, I think the Jungians would say there's some kind of projection going on, where in those moments where something deeply psychic in you, deep in your psyche, some kind of something primordial, kind of like manifests itself through you by being projected onto this situation, onto this person, and you're living like where your thoughts are and where your emotions are completely disproportionate to what's happening in front of you. You don't see what's happening in front of you because all you're seeing is your projection, right? But at the time, you're not aware of that because you're completely you're passive to it. You're a slave to it. You're being driven by it, and but anyone looking on will consider this person's out of his mind, right? But to you, yeah, to you it feels real.
We have a question from Gordon Holtberg. He's actually a St. John's College alumnus.
Yeah, hi Gordon. Nice to. I know we know each other. Hi Gordon. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, Gordon's a great guy. Mm-hmm. He asked this. This scene is operatic. You mentioned vampire movie, and I think of farce, Mozart. Yet you indicate a real drama, maybe a tragedy. The older male grooming a young girl brings to mind Bleak House, Charles Dickens, but as a story of psychological realism with an operatic touch. Would you compare this novel with the Godfather films, another important tale?
Interesting. Yeah, I think all of those have some element of truth in them. I think it's kind of like heightened reality. I mean, I think that these passages can be translated with dripping irony, right? You know, so they're tragic, but they're also ironic in terms of Genji's utter lack of self-knowledge. He's not able to see himself. When Murasaki calls him on it, Fujitsubo calls him on it and says, "The fault is not mine, it's in you," but you can't see it. So there's irony, there's tragedy. You suspect it's going to come crashing down sometime. There's a sense of terrible transgressiveness, right? You know, so one thing that that I should mention is that we're dealing with an East Asian culture where there's a culture of filiality, and Genji is going for, at this point, his father's wife, right? You know, so there's this kind of Oedipal thing that is very uncharacteristic of say Confucian cultures. So he's I think committing I think the worst transgression here right now. It's close to incest, but I think it's almost it's even worse in an East Asian culture. But he's drawn to it like a magnet, you know. So it could be that part of what turns him on is the very transgression. That is the ultimate transgression. I mean, it's a transgression against the parents, right? But it's also a political transgression to the emperor's wife.
We have some more questions. James Abrams asks, do you think Murasaki Shikibu makes a statement about the value of substitution in life? That is, Genji seems to be chasing something he doesn't have through the substitution of these women who resemble each other. Do you think Shikibu believes that it works? What would works even be?
Hi, James. Great question. I think that throughout the novel, she has a sense that this is very terrible. So this projection of an image on other people, turning people into a substitute. I think she's seeing this is the way Eros works most of the time, and so but she sees it's very destructive. So I don't think she thinks it can work. I'm not sure she believes in the possibility of of a lasting romantic relationship at all. I don't remember a single time where there's a happy relationship in Genji. At least a happy relationship that's based on, I guess, intense erotic love.
Well, so David Conway asks something very much related. He says, speaking of Genji's lack of self-knowledge, does he really know anyone he interacts with, either, or understand his impact on them? And if he doesn't know himself or know others, what does he know?
That's a great question.
That is.
I'm trying to think what does it take to answer that? Do I know myself well enough to be able to ask myself if Genji knows himself well enough? I mean, I actually don't think. See, one thing I didn't mention in the talk was that there's actually a fourth relationship that is very important in the book, and that's his relationship with a lady called the Rokuju Lady, who turns out was a lady that he slighted, and is a very proud lady, a proud, intelligent lady whom he slighted, and she appears to be as smart as he is. She's very quick, but she's wounded, and her angry spirit haunts the book. There are crucial moments when he's not sure if his wife Aoi or young Murasaki, when they die, are they killed by the Rokuju Lady's spirit, right? So there's a sense of spirit there. But what is this Rokuju Lady's spirit? Is it actually, does the book mean us to think of like an actual possession, or a demon, or a roving spirit of a soul that somehow is wounded and can't be contented, or is this itself a projection of Genji's guilt? So everything destructive is embodied in this spirit that seeks to destroy Genji through the ones he loves. And then so there is a sense, the book does have a sense, and I think Genji has a sense through this spirit, that there's something that he's neglected. There's something that he hasn't looked at that's trying to force itself into his field of vision and make himself feel it. Now, where's that coming from? So one can interpret it in various ways, either literally, or you can interpret it psychologically. But I think the very presence of the Rokuju Lady's spirit is an expression of kind of the side of Genji that he doesn't see, that is trying to make him see. I'm not sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Conscience or something like that?
I don't know. I don't know if it's conscience. I think it's something like conscience, but it's that sense of unfinished business, trail of destruction that is bound to have its consequences. You can't do this to people. But he's not even sure what he's done to people. So I think that he takes all his women, and on the surface of it, he looks after them. So this is this kind of interesting and unusual side of Genji. He's very generous, and he collects all of them. He doesn't want any of them to languish alone. So in essence, like, he builds like a walled community for them, right? A small village where they're all housed together in kind of an aesthetically extremely beautiful grounds where each one of them is placed, seasonally and directionally. So he, on the one hand, he appears to want to take care of them, and this might be his vision of himself as a kind and loving master who looks after all his people. But on the other hand, there's a sinister side that he's in effect collecting them, right, and housing them in a in a museum-like thing. Again, so which is real? Could it be that both views are right in a way? Murasaki doesn't tell us, and this is the other side of it. She doesn't tell us what to think. Lady Murasaki Shikibu, the author, I mean, and this is part of the power of the book, is that she doesn't tell us what to think, and she doesn't give us simple cues to her response. So what is it? Which means that it's thrown back on us, right? But it's as if she's watching it objectively. This is what happens. And it might be that she loves this man, but she realizes he's bad. And I think that's possible.
Well, we are almost out of time, but let me ask a question, unless someone else has one in addition. Is that what universal do you see here that kind of punctures through the cultural realities of the time, the cultural, the cultural arrangement of the time? Is there something universal that can be pulled out of this about, like you were saying, human transgressiveness, about things that you just can't do, a certain moral order that you just can't violate? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it is about human transgressiveness. I mean, partly it's so the everything has an every page of this book there's an edginess to it, and one might say you see that in 20th century Japanese fiction. The kind of there's a kind of kinkiness, a perversity about it. It's really it can be really dark. You see this in even anime series for kids. So it's really dark. There's a darkness to it. And so Genji, I think has a little bit of that perverseness. So when you look at erotic encounters, there's a thrill of breaking the rules, even when that comes with damaging someone, even when it comes with damaging yourself. There's an excitement to that, and I think the author of the Tale of Genji is extremely in touch with that kind of transgressiveness, the transgressiveness that turns us on, right? That makes life exciting. And she asks us to question that. I mean, we see this in 20th century films like Vertigo. So the idea, whenever you have very psychological love or thriller stories, we're in that Genji realm. But I think also that it also makes us question whether the moral response is the only one. Mm-hmm. Right? We like to judge in 21st century America, right? But is it only about right and wrong? Where does the beautiful fit in? Is it possible for somebody to be beautiful and bad? Ugly and good?
No.
Yeah.
So one more question: what makes this a great novel, a classic?
I think it's because of the power of the psychological insight, the characterization, the word by word, the word for word surprisingness of this. So with every page over more than 1,000 pages, you're surprised by it. So you have characters, especially later on when you deal with the two young men. It's very hard to predict what they're going to say and do next, but they'll say and do something that's interesting, that's in character, but surprising. So she's in touch with, I think, the mysteries of the human soul in a way, and she also it's also a very beautiful book. So maybe the passages I picked out didn't express the beautiful part of Genji, even though I think the narration and the psychological grasp of the interaction is very beautiful and stated with great conciseness and power, right? But I think for that she manages to pull that off page after page. At St. John's we spent 8 weeks studying this book, and what we find out is that really important things she tells us all along, but on first reading we don't notice them. So it then takes 10 to 12 10 to 12 very smart people just to keep up with her, right? So that she's an artist just in control of every detail of her story, and it's a big cast of characters too, you know, and she's got a very strong grasp of all the characters, but also where they were at any given time, how they relate to each other, what they're thinking about each other. You know, it's a little bit like Tolstoy.
It's a big compliment.
Yeah. So read it. If you haven't read it, read it.
Yeah.
You won't regret it.